Hello everyone, and welcome to this session, SciPoc. The learning objectives today are to understand what a business process is and to explain the benefits of the process view of an organization. We want to understand the relevance and importance of a SciPoc diagram in a process improvement project and create an overview of all the relevant elements in a process improvement project using the SciPoc diagram. But first, what is a business process? A business process is a repeatable, coherent sequence of activities with a clearly defined input, with a certain material or non-material achievement, the output, for internal or external customers. The flow of a process consumes time and resources and is often associated with repetitive tasks. When we refer to business processes in operations, we're often referring to the volume production of goods or services in a sequence of activities performed by a set of specialized resources. For example, for a skateboard producer, you need to have the inputs of wheels and the board and these supports that are called trucks. Then you need to perform process steps. You need to assemble the trucks and the wheels to the board. You need to sand the board. You need to paint the board. You're transforming the inputs into the outputs, which of course here is a skateboard. And this business process, this process flow, is of course not just applicable to manufacturing, but also to services. And there's many advantages to looking at your organization in terms of processes. It allows you to have a view of the activities as cross-functional flows instead of individual activities done in isolated silo functions. The process flows map the activities needed to complete a value-added step to generate a product or service. And here the focus is on the customer, the value-added activities that create the product or the service to meet the customer expectations. Process views are also applicable to any type of organization. In production, we can think of producing, for example, our skateboard using a simple production flow. If we're in a bank and processing a loan application, there would be an approval process flow that needs to be followed. For purchasing raw materials, for example, you need to first identify your suppliers, receive different quotes, develop a contract with the supplier. There's a certain process flow that you have to follow. Flows can also be applied at any and all levels of an organization. For example, our skateboard, we were looking at the individual activities used in making the skateboard. You could, though, consider the skateboard factory and look at the entire production processes as a flow in the factory. We can also look at that factory as part of the flow for a sports producer, a sports equipment producer. And also, managing the processes rather than the individual activities allows the definition of clear performance metrics that reflect the value to the customers and allow an end-to-end process improvement. Here we show our skateboard flow, but this time we're including also the supplier of the individual components, and we're showing the customer here riding his or her skateboard. And here we can see we have then all the entire end-to-end stages for our process flow. Supplier, input, process, output, and customers. And this is abbreviated as SciPoc. This is the basis then for creating the so-called SciPoc diagram, a tool that lists the components and the activities that can occur in a process. And why is this useful? We're starting to trace the activities, not just to produce a product or services, but from the supplier of the inputs through the entire process to the customer. The SciPoc diagram gives us a high-level picture of the value-added steps in the process. And it's often used in any type of business process management and is a common tool in Six Sigma projects. So why use SIPOC? As we just said, it allows us to trace the activities from the supplier all the way through the customer. It gives us a high-level picture and shows us the value-added steps in the process. Importantly, though, it sets down the process in black and white for a common understanding by the team and can be used as a first step for thinking about the process and, of course, the scope of the project, the customer expectations, the materials, inputs, and different entities and resources involved. It also can provide the basis for the first discussion of what could be influencing the critical to quality parameters. Disadvantage is that the SIPOC is very top level. It doesn't show any time ordering or process structure dependencies, and the process details can be indeed very sparse. Now let's look at an example. Here we have a SIPOC for an office chair. We have this assembled from different components in a very simple process. Raw materials enter the process. We have the base of the chair is then connected to the frame, and then the upholstery, the cushions are attached to the base, and then we have the final assembly where the wheels and arms are attached, and then you have your complete chair. First of all, let's look at the suppliers. So in this process, the suppliers are going to be any entity that brings the required inputs for the process to the start of the process. Here we have suppliers of different types of raw material. If you have a service, then the suppliers are the people which will perform the service. In this example, the suppliers for the office chair assembly process are those who supply the components, such as the wheels and the cushions and the nuts and the bolts. But also you have the chair frame, a partially assembled part of the chair, and that might actually come from a different part of the factory as the output of another process. Now let's look at the inputs. Inputs are then the raw materials, the actual things that are supplied. And here for our chair, we've got rollers, cushions, stuffing, screws and bolts, and the cushions and everything that would go into making our chair. And again, we're looking, these inputs are going to be transformed into something that has added value for the customer. Next, we look at the process. And here we have the transformation of the inputs using a sequence of steps to the output. And here we're going to assemble our chair with 3 different process steps that we mentioned before. First, we attach the base to the frame, we add the cushions and the upholstery, and then we finally assemble all the components. But of course, a process can be the steps in completing a service. Wash hair, apply conditioner, rinse, dry and style, apply hairspray. And as we mentioned before, the business process is often repetitive tasks. These tasks then are performed as a sequence with specialized resources. Now we go to the outputs. So here, of course, what we have is our office chair. We've assembled our chair. This is then the physical or non-physical achievement or result of the process. The last stage is then, for the SIPOC diagram, the customer. And it is really the most important because it's the customer who decides that we're making this chair in the first place. This is the person who is valuing our output. And so, for example, our businessman, business person sitting in his office chair. And this customer is willing to pay more than the raw materials and the process costs. So when we think of the customer, we normally think of the end customer. Here we have our office worker. But of course, the customer is any entity that receives the goods. For example, this could be the retail store that sells the office furniture to then the end customer, or it could be a production process that will take as its input the output of your current process. Now we have 2 more small examples in this lecture. Here we have the SIPOC for washing a dog. As your inputs, then you have the dog, you have some shampoo, brushing materials, and inputs, you have your dog and your shampoo and your materials, and the suppliers then would be, of course, the dog owner, and then maybe a pet supply store for the special shampoo, special brush. In the process, you're going to put the dog into the bath, you're going to wash the dog, you're going to dry the dog and brush him off. The output will be your clean dog, and your customer will be the dog owner. Really simple process. If we look at candle production, a slightly maybe less familiar process for most of us, we have as an inputs things like raw paraffin. We have, that has to come from them. I'll put the inputs on there. We have the wick that comes in. We have different types of dye to dye our candles different colors, and we'll have our packing material. So we need to have that coming from suppliers of the commodities, the paraffin. We need to have maybe a process that treats the dye and then treats the wick, and then that will be input into our candle production. We need to have the dye blocks that could be also prepared in a different part of the process so that we can then use those to dye our candles. And of course, we need some kind of supplier of the packing material. These then go through a more complex process. Here's very simply written. We're going to have to pulverize the paraffin so that we can use that to mold the candles. Those will get then dipped in the dye, and the wicks will be inserted. I haven't put that in there. And then we'll pack up the candles. So the output would be then our colored candles, and the customer would be maybe a housewife. The picture there, traditional old film housewife. But there's one other thing I want to point out here. There are different entities that can govern the quality. So not only do you have the customer who would like to have a yellow candle for her table, but you have restrictions and specifications that are required by different entities. This is here the European Candle Association. They specify, for example, how much soot your candle can generate. And so your customer could also be then these specifications, so that then you can put a particular label on your candle and show that you meet these quality specifications.